The Max Torno podcast has featured guests who objectively have way bigger followings than me, people with 10x my brand size, massive audiences, household names in their niches, and yet they all said yes for being on my podcast, even though the podcast has less than 5,000 subscribers on YouTube currently. And the best part about all this is I never begged, I never paid anyone, and I never relied on luck to get these people on. There's a strategy behind it, a positioning play. And in this video, I'm breaking down exactly how I landed each and every one of these big names, what I said, how I framed it, and of course the behind the scenes moves that nobody really sees. So if you're trying to build a real authority brand, this is how you punch way above your weight class. As you know, of course, welcome. On this channel, we're helping established business owners such as yourself scale and automate their business, and of course, on top of that, build a massive brand. So if you're already doing around $30,000 a month, you've got something real to offer, but you want access, you want higher level connections, you want to build a network of killers, and you want to position yourself as a peer to people who are way ahead of you, then this video is gonna show you how to make them see you as someone worth their time. Starting with the first kind of needle mover guest I had on, and that is Noah Morris. Now, Noah Morris might not ring a bell for you, but he's quite famous within his own little industry. He's known for running and setting up YouTube cash cow videos, so to speak. And it's really interesting because, again, the mainstream person doesn't know who he is, but he's very famous within his industry. So the lesson for you here is, if you cannot get these super big people on yet, go for niche brands, go for people that are famous within their own domain, because this podcast episode I did with him is to this day one of my most clicked on podcast episodes on YouTube, which is very, very amazing. Now, it was relatively easy to get him on because, again, he's not mainstream famous. What did I say to get him on? Well, the trick here is I was his client. I paid him multiple $1,000s every month to consult us on some of my YouTube channels, and I literally just said, Noah, I'd love to promote your stuff on my podcast because working with you has been very, very amazing, and a lot of people on my podcast are entrepreneurs, so it's a good audience to tap into. And you can see here again the psychology behind that is I didn't say, Noah, can I have you on my podcast so I can get value from you? No, I said, hey, I'd love to promote your stuff because people are always intrinsically going to say, what's in it for me? Right? Now, the second big needle mover guest that I've had on was Tai Lopez. Now, the main lesson here for Tai Lopez is how the hell did I get him on? I was one of his clients. I, in fact, paid him $100,000 for one-on-one coaching, and I literally said, look, Tai, I'd love to be a client. I'd love to work with you. I think we can move the needle quite a lot, but I also want to promote your stuff to my audience, and, you kind of have like a little bit of a comeback, and, hey, I'm paying you $100K. If you have the time over the next 6 months to hop on a quick podcast with me, I'd love to do it. So here I kind of played the card a little bit of like, I paid you $100K for one-on-one coaching. Let me promote your stuff / come on my podcast. And it worked. He literally says, yo, let's do it today. And we literally shot the entire podcast episode on like 3 or 4 iPhones, which nobody ever noticed, by the way. So no excuse that you don't have the video equipment for that. And it's pretty amazing. So the lesson for you is pay for good mentors and then ask if you can promote their stuff. Pretty straightforward. Now, writing off that, I actually got another great guest on, and that was a person that I've looked up to for years before, a complete legend of legends within his own domain, and that is Mystery, aka the very first big dating coach out there in the world. And how the hell did I get Mystery on my podcast? To be fully honest, there, it was just sheer luck, plus kind of like the momentum that I had from the Tai Lopez episode. It was super funny. The way I got him on board was I actually wanted to have one of his good friends and business partners, Baxter, on the podcast. And Baxter was in Helsinki, and I was in Helsinki as well. And I said, hey, Baxter, you want to do a podcast? I'll rent the studio. And he's like, yeah, sure. So we kind of schedule it, and he says, we're on the way, and we will be here in 10 minutes. And I'm like, who's we? Whatever. And then he just shows up with Mystery. And Mystery comes up and he's like, Max, love your podcast. I saw some of your episodes. And I'm just like, you're Mystery. You're literally one of the main reasons why my very first business in the dating advice niche took off. Like, dude. And he was like so cool. And here I was just in front of the podcast studio entrance. And it was just me, Baxter, and Mystery just shooting the shit and having fun and just like we could just chat about everything right away. Like, we had such a great connection, and I'm like, oh my God. But then I thought, like, okay, maybe he's just gonna, be there and kind of like behind the scenes while Baxter and I do the podcast, because Mystery has the reputation of like not really wanting to do guest things and like be on other people's podcasts, etc. So I was totally fine with him just kind of standing behind the cameras while Baxter and I shoot the shit on the podcast. And then the three of us sit down, and Mystery puts his headphones on. He's like, "Is this what we're going to speak?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, I guess this is going to happen." So we're going to have Mystery on. The lesson for you here is stay at it, okay? Don't give up. I mean, I've had over 300 episodes on my podcast already. A lot of them just shot by myself, like monologue podcasts. But it took a while until I started having these very big guests on. So sometimes good things just happen as long as you stay consistent. Another one of my biggest guests in a very similar domain was actually Kyle Frungen, aka Coach Kyle, who's also one of the biggest dating coaches right now. He has, I think, over 1 million followers on TikTok and Instagram. He's pretty big. He gets recognized everywhere. How did I get him on my podcast? Well, it was actually the other way around. He was my client. So we helped him scale his coaching business to over $100,000 a month. And then I literally said, Kyle, look, like, my audience is still a lot of dating folks that have followed me from my first business. I'm going to promote your stuff. It's going to get you a ton of followers, and you're probably going to make a lot of money. So again, here, frame it like it's a big win for them. So the big lesson here is be good at what you do, provide value with whatever you have to offer, and you will attract bigger clients who you can then, of course, also get on the podcast. And there you just frame it that it's a big win for them. Similarly to that, one of the biggest guests I've had on more recently was actually Darren Lee. Now, the way I got Darren Lee on is pretty interesting. He's kind of known to be like one of the podcast people. He like teaches people how to build podcast followings. He's a great guy. I literally just bought one of his programs about how to build a podcast, because I'm like, hey, maybe there's some things I didn't know yet. And it was just like a front-end low-ticket product for a couple $100, and I liked it, and I DM'd him. I'm like, hey man, bought your product. I just want to say it's really awesome. It's helped me a lot. Thanks a lot for that. So of course he DM'd back from that. And then, I said, hey, whenever you're around, like, I'd love to have you on my podcast and promote your podcast product. Shout out Darren, and have you on. And of course he said like, yes. And next thing we knew, we set up a Zoom podcast that we did, and it was pretty amazing. So the lesson for you here is, again, pay for good mentors and then ask if you can promote your stuff. Now, funny enough, the next time I had Darren Lee on the podcast, this time in person, was in Miami. And I said, hey, I'm in Miami, you're in Miami too, let's do one in person this time. By that time, we've been vibing pretty well, and it was pretty awesome. And he's like, yeah, can I bring a friend? Her name is Lara Costa. And I'm like, Lara Costa, that name rings a bell. Turns out she's the #1 UK female LinkedIn creator, and she's crushing it. And I've actually followed her on Twitter, and I'm like, this person is really interesting. She talks a lot of shit, but she backs it up, and she's really good at what she does. And he's like, can I bring her along and have her on the podcast? And I said, yes, sure. So I had Darren Lee and Lara Costa on the podcast. So the lesson here is, again, do a good job at the podcast with whatever guest you have on. Have a good time, because many people that are on your podcast will then connect you with the next person. Similarly to that was actually Suelio Almeida. He's someone that I've always looked up to when it comes to race car driving. It's one of my little hobbies. I do a lot of sim racing, and I loved his YouTube videos and his Instagram videos. So I just, again, DM'd him. I'm like, hey man, love your stuff, love following your stuff. He replied, and I just said, hey, would love to promote your stuff. Again, you get the lesson on my podcast. A lot of people are entrepreneurs, Again here, lesson for you, shoot your shot. Send people a DM, even if they're way bigger than you. The worst answer you get can be a no, or they just don't reply. But nothing is lost. So I took that lesson. I'm like, damn, the Suelio guy, he's pretty huge. He just replied to give him on my podcast. I wonder if I can replicate that. Spoiler alert, I could. I messaged David Packhouse. So if you've seen the movie War Dogs with Jonah Hill and Miles Teller, that's based on David Packhouse, on the real person, which is pretty interesting. So I saw he's doing some stuff now. He has a pretty interesting coaching offer. So I just DM'd him. And again here, he replied. And whenever I was next in Miami and he was around, we said, let's get together and shoot a video. So again here, shoot your shot. The worst answer you can get is a no or a no reply, but nothing's lost either way. Similarly to that was actually having Michael Sartine on my podcast. How the hell did I get him on? Well, we actually had common friends, and I was on his podcast. So that, of course, helped a lot when I said, hey, by the way, I have a podcast now too. I would love to have you on and promote your podcast, which again was an easy sale, so to speak. So the lesson here is build a name for yourself, because it's not about follower amounts, it's about how interesting you are as a character. So Michael Sartine knew me, but he also knew I didn't have the biggest brand in the world, but it didn't matter because he knew, hey, Max Torno, having him on my guest, it's gonna be an interesting conversation. And then when I later on invited him, he knew that already, and it was pretty easy. Now, an even bigger guest that I had on was actually Sterling Cooper. Now, he's an ex-adult film star, and he has a very, very large following all around social media. How the hell did I get this guy on? Well, funny enough, he actually DM'd me once, I think on Twitter or on Instagram, asking me for advice on his low ticket conversion rates. And I just helped him out. I'm like, oh yeah, you guys should do this, use that. And then I stayed in touch with him, every now and then, sent a message, replied to one of his stories or his posts, and we've kind of like vibed like this. And then I had plans to go to Marbella, and I hit him up and I said, hey, I'll be around if you want to be on my podcast. And he says, yes, absolutely, no problem. So the lesson here for you is, again, become good at what you do, plus shoot your shot, because you never know who's going to say yes. Now, one of the craziest guests is yet to come, and that was Justin Waller, who you might have seen literally hang out with Donald Trump, with people like Andrew Tate. He has a very, very big brand himself. And the way I got him on the podcast was Sterling Cooper, the previous guest, just connected me, which was interesting. So I had this great podcast with Sterling. We vibed well. We grabbed dinner later, and Sterling just gets up and is like, do you know Justin Waller? Let me connect you. I'm going to DM him right now. And just like, I didn't even ask. He's just shout out to Sterling for being a really cool dude. But the lesson here is, do a good job at the podcast, have a good time, vibe well with people, because again, many people will connect you, just like Darren Lee did with Lara Costa as well. The next guest I've had on is pretty big in his respective industry, and he's crushing it. And that is King Keto, aka Brandon Carter. Now, how did I get him on? I had connections from my previous mentor. So my previous mentor, Owen Cook, was collaborating a lot with Brandon Carter. In fact, I collaborated with Brandon about 10 years ago myself, when I had like 0 tattoos and I was a little bit chubbier myself. And I just stayed in touch with him the entire time until I happened to be in Miami. And then I said, hey, let me promote your stuff again on my podcast. So the lesson here is connect with people and then stay in touch with them. Like really nurture a relationship. Even if you just DM them like once every 6 months, you comment on some of their stories, you stay in touch like that. And that's pretty good. So I had stayed in touch with him. I gave him shout outs. I sent some value every now and then. In fact, I remember I gave him access to one of our low ticket programs because I thought it was honestly helpful. And like that, whenever I was in the same city, I could hit him up and we could get on. Similarly to that was one of the biggest guests I've had on to this day, and that is Elliot Hulse, who you might know if you've been watching personal development content for many years. You definitely know Elliot Hulse. He's like one of the OGs of OGs. And again, that was a connection from my previous mentor. I actually was my mentor's assistant when my mentor Owen Cook and Elliot Hulse were collaborating. And Elliot and me, we shook hands, we had a quick chat while they were collaborating, and then we stayed in touch over Instagram, and every now and then I replied to some of his stories, he kind of watched mine, and it's been that easy. So the lesson for you is, again, get mentors right, and also time things right, because I saw that Elliot has been working on relaunching some of his YouTube content again. So when I knew I was gonna be close by, I DM'd him and I said, hey man, because again, we've been in touch already, I would love to promote your new YouTube stuff. I'd love to have this podcast. I can come to you. You don't have to do anything. It's super simple. I have my own crew with me. I'll just swoop in. We'll have a chat and it might promote your stuff. And he said yes, and the rest was history. Pretty easy. Similarly to that, while I was in Miami, I got one of the OG of OG marketing legends that are currently at the top of their game, Jeremy Haynes, on my podcast. How the hell did I get Jeremy Haynes on? Well, our CMO, Robin, is actually his client. So kind of Jeremy knew me a little bit just over Robin already. So the lesson there is, again, pay for good mentors and then ask if you can promote him. Shout out to Jeremy. Similarly to that, I've had Cole Gordon on, one of the OGs when it comes to sales and training sales teams. How did I get him on? Well, I paid for his mentorship program. I think I paid over $200K over the years for being in his programs already because they're really good. Lesson for you is pay for good mentors and then ask if you can promote their stuff. And funny enough, Cole Gordon shows up to the podcast. I was in the same city as his. He shows up to the podcast literally in a purple Lamborghini Urus. And I'm like, that's a nice car. And he's like, yeah, I'm not a car guy at all. I just bought it randomly because it looked nice. And then I had it wrapped in this color, in this purple color, which was really interesting. Which leads me to one of my biggest heroes, people that I've been watching for quite a while now, who just recently was on the Max Torno podcast as well, and that is William Brown. The crazy thing how I got him on is I actually got a lunch invite from my good friend Shako Lockman, who was also on the podcast. And he said, hey man, you're in Dubai. Me and a bunch of cool buddies are going to lunch at some place in Dubai right now if you want to join. And I said, yeah, I'll join. I show up. There was a bunch of other cool people and William Brown. And I'm like, oh, I watched your videos. He's like, oh, cool. Yeah, nice to meet you. I'm William. I'm like, yeah, I know. So we chatted. We had a good time. And after the dinner, I'm like, hey, William, what are you doing tomorrow? Like, I'm in town for a couple more days. I'd love to have you on my podcast and promote your stuff, because I found out at the dinner that William was launching this book, or he had this book that he's promoting. I'm like, listen, a lot of my followers, I don't have the biggest following, but it's full of entrepreneurs and you have a great book. I'd love to promote it on my podcast. And he said, you know what? No. He said no. I'm like, oh, too bad, no worries. So he said, well, the reason why I said no is because I'm flying to Singapore or Bali or something tomorrow. And I'm like, yeah, no worries, let's stay in touch whenever you're back, no problem. Big lesson here is like, just don't get bummed out when you do get a no. And then literally the next day I get a message by William, says, hey man, you still down to do the podcast? I delayed my flight or whatever, or I'm taking another flight. I can be on the podcast. Next thing you know, next day I show up at his place and I do the podcast with him. A big last lesson I want to say here too is that you should always make it as easy for your guests as possible. Never say like fly in to do my podcast or anything. Try to come to them. Try to literally frame it as like, look, I'm going to show up with my team. We can do it wherever you want. We can do it at my place. We can do it at your place. All you got to do is sit down and have a good time. That's it. You don't need to prepare. And like I said, I don't have the biggest audience, but I would love to promote your stuff. That really helps as well. So with William Brown specifically, I call this monkey barring. Monkey barring is, the monkey bar you grab from one bar to the next. So as you have more and more podcast guests, most people will end up connecting you, or you can specifically say, hey, who else do you think would come to my podcast? I would love to promote their stuff. And it's the craziest thing. You will have so many connections. You don't even know what to do with all of them. And you will have way more people who could come to your podcast than you'd think. So in my case, it all started with one guest that I had in my head. And then I monkey barred from that to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. And I still have so many podcast guests that said yes, they would love to come, but I haven't even organized it yet. So that is pretty damn amazing. Hey, if you need specific help with building your brand, with scaling your existing business, with automating it, like I said, we help people from like roughly 30 to 50K a month all the way to 500K a month. So if you're anywhere in that range and you haven't cracked the 500K a month yet, you can absolutely probably try to work with us. I'd love to speak to you. I'd love to figure out if and how exactly we could potentially help you. So I'm gonna put a link down in the description below where you can apply, where we can have a look. And thanks for watching. I appreciate you. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Cheers.